Okay. Thank you, everybody, for your patience. We appreciate it. Good morning, and thanks for joining us today on Monday, May 18th, for our webinar entitled Returning to Work Under the COVID-19 Cloud. This is Denise Keddy, and I'm your moderator for the session today. If you are a regular attendee to our webinars, you know that we normally do not conduct them using Zoom, but because the demand for this topic, as you know, has been so high, we needed to make the decision on Friday to flip to the webinar to a Zoom platform. So we appreciate your patience and your flexibility. As Linda mentioned, we are really going to keep everybody on mute today because a lot of people will have questions. We ask you to use the chat box for questions, but please make sure that you are on mute so it doesn't disturb the presentation. A couple of quick housekeeping notes. Our webinar is approximately 1.5 hours today because we have a lot of things to cover. Please take a moment to visit the chat box. I am just putting in a link to the presentation right now. So you can download the presentation to follow along or so that you have it to reference later on. If you have questions during the presentation, please post them in the chat area on the dashboard at any time during the presentation. Since we have a lot of material to cover today, we'll be stopping a few times during the webinar to address your questions. If we didn't get to your question during a particular period, we'll download those and get back to you after the webinar. The webinar is being recorded today and all accompanying materials are protected by copyright. Our presentation provides general information as of today, and I'm going to say 10 a.m. because things have changed rapidly. We always recommend that you consult your HR and legal professional to address specific situations and ensure that you have the most current information, especially for any coronavirus or COVID-19 related rules or regulations. Taking us through the complex environment of returning to work during the COVID-19 crisis is our human capital expert, Linda Duffy. Linda Duffy is the president of Ethos Human Capital Solutions. Linda and her team are known for building the magic of human connection with their consulting, training, and recruiting and payroll support programs. The Ethos teams works closely with your company by developing strategies for business leaders to get the right systems, people, and culture in place within your organization so that you as a business owner can focus on running your business and achieving your goals. Linda, can you get us started today?
I can, Denise, and thank you so much, and thanks to everybody for attending. I'm glad we moved this over to Zoom. As Denise said, we appreciate your flexibility, and that's sort of the key word of the day. I'm watching the participant total, keep clicking up, which is great. I think we had close to 200 people register for this, so I appreciate the interest, and obviously this is a topic that's important to everybody. You'll notice on this slide I've included a couple of links. The long link there is to a special web page that we have that has some different COVID links on it and links to our prior emails, so you can get a lot of good information there. You can also join our mailing list if you're not on it, and that way you'll get notice of future webinars as well. You'll also see on the right-hand side that we have the slides that you can download for this webinar, and I think Denise dropped that into the chat box already. We'll also have it on the last slide, and she'll drop it in periodically, so everybody that wants to can go ahead and download the slides and play along with me as I go through this. As she mentioned, this is going to be a longer webinar than normal, and that's because there's so much content. So I'm going to speak quickly, as I always do. But I will stop periodically and take questions. And so with that, let me just tell you quickly what our agenda is. Thankfully, we now have some specific guidance for reopening. So we're going to walk you through that guidance and what's required for the state of California. I'm going to pay particular attention today to guidance for offices because I think that probably that is going to encompass the majority of the people that are on this call. There is specific guidance for other industries, however, so you should know that as well. We'll also talk about OSHA and workers' comp and how that's being impacted by COVID-19. And then we'll get into, besides the complexities of the compliance itself, we'll get into some just really just general guidelines for, okay, how do you decide who to call back, things like that. Talk about whether you can change people's compensation, what you need to be communicating to people, and then we'll also go through really specific scenarios that we're seeing as pretty commonplace and talk about how to do it, and then we'll also take questions at the end as well. So let's start with just the guidelines for reopening. So first and foremost, there's no specific guidelines nationally, as we know, for reopening. And so one of the things we just need to just deal with is the fact that we're going to always have more requirements for California as a whole. So California has announced a 4-stage approach. We are right now entering phase 2, and you can go to the link that's on the screen to actually find all of the details about COVID-19 and how California is dealing with it. We were in the stay-at-home order. We still are for the most part, but we are starting to phase into phase 2, and that started last week. And that means that lower risk businesses and some public spaces can start to reopen. But have specific guidelines for that as well. We are probably months away from going to stage 3, which is higher risk businesses. Those include things like hair salons, nail salons, things like that, gyms, movie theaters. That's going to be probably months away, may or may not even happen this year, according to the governor. And then the 4th one is like concerts and conventions, sporting events with live crowds where, you know, massive amounts of people are going to be together. And that most definitely will not happen this year, according to the governor. So that's sort of the overview. But let's take a look at stage 2 guidelines. There's actually 2 parts to this. And I'm a little confused, to be honest with you, when I was just in the car driving back to my office, and they were talking about some mall in Los Angeles that's going to open. I don't even know how they're allowed to do that, because there's 2 parts, 2 specific sets of criteria that have to be met. And the first one is that the county must meet certain criteria before anyone within that county can open. And I'll show you that in a second. And then if you're in a county that's allowed to start reopening, then the business itself has some specific guidance it has to follow. So the county criteria to move forward includes all of those bullets at the bottom here. So no more than 1 case per 10,000 people in the last 14 days, for example, no deaths within the last 14 days, and then so forth. So when you look at California as a whole, and you can go to the website and get this information, the counties in yellow are the ones that are allowed to move into stage 2. Right? So you can see that there's like more than half the state that's not allowed to move to stage 2 yet, including the county of Orange. So, and that's the reason, because if you look under positive cases, we're at 5.02 per 10,000, and the standard has to be below 1. And then also we've had 35 new deaths in the last 14 days. So we have to go 14 consecutive days without a death, and we have to get that positive case down to 1 per 10,000, and we're not there yet. So that's the other thing that we need to think about. Some overarching ideas, though, that I want you to think through as we talk about all of this is, first and foremost, is returning to work in person even necessary? You know, I've talked to a few clients, and interestingly, like one called me a couple weeks ago and said they were starting to come back to work, and he wanted my help in thinking through what he needed to be thinking through. And I said to him, like, why are you bringing people back to work right now? You know, are you suffering? You know, is productivity suffering? Is efficiency suffering? Is, you know, what's going on that's causing you to want to do this? And he thought about it for a second. He was like, yeah, you're right. There's really no reason to. We just sort of felt like it was a natural progression. So if returning to work isn't necessary, then leave people at home right now if it's not hurting the business. Appoint a point person or a team to sort of oversee all of this. You know, if you have a safety committee, maybe they're the right people to get involved, or you know, maybe it's a management team, something like that. But there's going to be a lot of things you have to do to reopen your business. So, you know, put somebody in charge, have a COVID czar or something who's the point person for you, so you know that you're doing this effectively. Over communicate with your employees, and not just really your employees, the public, vendors, customers, everybody. You know, I tell people, remember to be human, because right now it's really tough on everybody, and people are still afraid. You know, people are in different stages of this, trying to deal with it. So just remember to be human with people, and also acknowledge, if you're a manager, that you don't have all the answers, right? Be willing to be vulnerable and say, like, hey, I'm scared too, or I hit my wall, I'm over this, or wherever you are, because I find that it sort of ebbs and flows. But do what you can to create a sense of security and stability for your employees, because especially those of you that have employees that aren't back at work, that are worried financially, you know, about how they're going to pay their bills, or they're struggling to get food or whatever. We've got clients at all ends, you know, of a spectrum, from, you know, we have healthcare, urgent care clinic clients, right? They have a whole different set of issues, and we've got people that never missed a beat, because they're an essential business. So, everybody's in a different stage, and we just need to deal with them and sort of meet them where they are, and then educate them to decrease fear. And I'll give you a specific example later, because we get these phone calls where so-and-so doesn't want to come back to work because they're afraid, or a coworker tested positive, or a coworker lives with someone who tested positive, and there's just a lot of fear because they don't understand enough information. So educating them is helpful. And then, of course, like I said before, just be as flexible as possible right now. Okay, so general California guidelines. Before reopening, all facilities must do 5 things. And one is perform a detailed risk assessment, right? And then implement a site-specific protection plan. And you'll see in a second that that requirement is to be in writing. The second thing is to train all of your employees. Third one, to implement individual control measures and screenings. And we'll talk about what those are, but relative to each person that's there. Implement cleaning and disinfecting protocols, and then physical distancing guidelines. So just as an overarching theme, those are the 5 things that we need to address, and I'm going to drill down in all of those more specifically. You can go get the California guidance from this website. So COVID19.ca.gov is the main hub for everything having to do with COVID in California. And then /industry-guidance is where you can get it. Now, like I said before, I'm taking the office workspace today and using that. But if you go to that website, you'll see it's broken out for construction and manufacturing and all sorts of different industries, healthcare. Everybody's going to have different guidance, but the bulk of it's going to be the same. So you'll see when you hit the drop down for office workspaces, you'll see 2 hyperlinks. One is for the guidance, and then one is for the checklist, okay? They're basically the same thing. They just created a checklist from the guidance to give you an easy place to make sure that you're hitting all of the high points. So those are 2 documents you can go download right now for whatever industry you're in, to see what you need to do to be able to open up your office or whatever type of business that you have. Okay, so the very first thing you need to do is come up with a work site specific plan. And it says every office location. So if you have multiple sites, you're going to have to detail it for that particular site, not just have a general one. So this is right out of the guidance. I just took a screenshot of it so you could see how detailed it is that they're giving you. So you need to designate a person in each office, for example, to implement the plan, identify contact information, train your employees, regularly evaluate the workspace, right? So it goes on and on. So you're going to have to go through and think through all of the different things as, how you need to deal with COVID-19 at that specific work location, and put it in a written policy and then update it as needed. So let's talk about what's included in the employee training. So that's phase 2. Now, also, I will tell you, I'm not sure how you're going to do the training. Something you want to think about is, are you going to do this via webinar? Are you going to have written materials? Are you going to record videos? Obviously, the answer is not. We're going to get everybody into a training room unless you can do so 6 feet apart, right, with everybody wearing masks. So think about those type of details too as we talk about this. So the different things they want you to include on the training are talk about COVID-19, how to prevent it from spreading, who's the most at-risk people that you have, not by name, but just in general, over 65, compromised immune systems, that type of thing. You're going to need to give some thought to self-screening at home, or taking temperatures and doing a symptom check using the CDC guidelines. And so you need to tell people, what are the symptoms of COVID-19? How do you do a self-screening? The importance of not coming to work if they have any symptoms, or if they live with someone who's been diagnosed with COVID-19. Obviously, they need to seek medical attention if symptoms become severe. The importance of hand washing and social distancing. Also, proper use of face coverings. And again, you need to think about, do you have face coverings to give them? Can you order face coverings at this point? Ensure temporary or contract workers are also trained. And then information on employer or government sponsored leave benefits. So things like the Family First Coronavirus Relief Act, the FFCRA, remember there's two parts to that. There's the Emergency Paid Sick Leave and the expanded Family Medical Leave Act. So you need to talk about those. You need to talk about workers' comp benefits as well. So all of this has to be included in the training. And again, you need to give some thought to how you're going to actually do that training. The second step is individual control measures and screening. So provide either temperature or symptom screenings for all workers. They specifically say at the beginning of their shift. You also can do that for vendors, contractors, or other workers entering. So you need to think about, do you want employees to do that at home, or do you want them to do it once they come to the office? If you're going to do it when people come to the office, then there's going to be certain rules that you want to follow, and we can talk about those in a second as well. You want to encourage people who are exhibiting any sort of symptoms, whether it's coronavirus or not, to stay at home. Don't have them come to the office. If for no other reason, then even if they have, common cold, or they have a different type of flu or something like that, all of your employees are going to freak out if somebody comes to work sick. So just tell people to stay home if they have any sort of symptoms. And then you're going to need to provide them with personal protective equipment, PPE, require it, and also enforce the use of it. And that's written into this guidance as well. They're highly recommending face coverings for people whenever they come near others, meaning within 6 feet again. And they're also cautioning you to remember never to share PPE. So you're not going to, put one face mask in the department and everybody uses it, right? That's common sense, but you'd be surprised. So let's talk about the employee health screening. The EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, has issued guidelines. The Department of Fair Employment and Housing, which is the counterpart in California, hasn't really come out with anything specifically, and thankfully nothing contrary really to the EEOC guidelines. EEOC says it's perfectly acceptable for you to take temperatures prior to allowing employees to report to work. So think about, do you want to issue thermometers to your employees? Do you want them to do a self-check of symptoms at home? Do you want to wait till they come on site? What do you want to do? The CDC guidance is if somebody has a temperature of 100.4 or higher, then they should not come on site. Okay, so that's the number that you should be using as your cutoff, or you can do lower, but that's the number that the CDC recommends. You also could ask them about respiratory symptoms. Do you have a cough? Do you have trouble breathing? So you know how to get the CDC list of symptoms for COVID-19, and you could create like a little checklist, for example, and give it to your employees, and they could do a self-check at home, or when they come to the office, if you want, somebody could be standing there, taking everybody's temperature. If you're going to do it at the office, you want to document all of the information in a confidential medical file. You do not want to release anybody's confidential medical information to anybody else. So I would not have a general log of any kind that says, hey, log your temperature here, right? And then the next person sees it as well. Or, what kind of symptoms are you having? Do not have any public information. So I would have one person designated per shift, or maybe two people designated per shift that have been trained on how to take temperatures, know what the symptoms are, ask questions. Or you could also give the employees a specific form to fill out, but they would fill it out individually and then turn it in, something like that. You could have them, before they come to the office, email you, or there's a lot of different ways to comply with this. You just need to think through what's going to be the easiest for your population, and also how to keep that information confidential. If they're coming on site, just remember that time spent waiting to be screened is compensable time. So if you have 20 employees in line, while they're standing in line waiting to come in to get tested, then you need to pay them for that time. Now, here's like the little bit that's in conflict is California employers may not ask for a diagnosis. You can inquire about symptoms, but you cannot ask somebody, hey, do you have COVID? Now, here's the other problem with this, of course, is that in order to get tax credits, if you're paying somebody the EPSL, or somebody's out on EFMLA and you're paying them, is you have to have documentation to back it up, right, that it was COVID related. So it's a little bit in conflict there. I would just, again, err on the side of caution when it comes to releasing medical information. I think if employees want to apply for EPSL, then they need to provide some sort of documentation from a healthcare provider saying, hey, I can't come in because of this, before you just start paying them 80 hours of sick pay. Okay, step 4 is going to be developing cleaning and disinfecting protocols. So obviously the focus is going to be on high traffic areas such as break rooms, lunch rooms where people congregate, stairwells, handrails, elevators, all of those places where you're going to have multiple people at any given time. You want to also think about common touch points, right? Doorknobs, toilets, hand washing facilities, any place where people are going to be repeatedly touching that same surface. You want to make sure that you're frequently disinfecting those points of contact, right? And sometimes it's little things like you don't even think about. For example, are you going to continue to have like a central coffee pot, right? Where everybody's going to go in, grab the coffee pot, fill up their mug, right? You might want to get rid of that. You want to think about, are you going to still bring in lunch for everybody? Are you going to bring in the box of donuts in the morning or bagels or something? I don't think I would do that right now, right? You could do individually bagged donuts or bagels and put them in the lunchroom for people to use, or you could have individually boxed lunches or something like that. But I think for the time being, you don't want to bring in like a platter, of food where everybody's going to be touching it, or, any sort of buffet situation, right, for lunches. Uh, so assign cleaning duties during regular working hours, because again, if you ask somebody to clean, that's compensable time. Come up with a schedule, come up with certain people that have been trained, however you're going to do it. You probably should think through also, do I need to give people more time during the day if I'm going to assign them cleaning, or can they get it done in their normal work schedule? And also think through about how to schedule people so there is time to clean and disinfect. I don't just mean for that individual, but does someone need to come in an hour before a shift starts or stay after a shift ends to be able to clean and disinfect? You want to avoid sharing things like phones, work supplies, office equipment. Some things you're not going to be able to not share, for example, like copiers, faxes, printers, keyboards, things like that. Because some, obviously everybody has to use it, but those are the types of things that you want to clean and disinfect more frequently. They actually said in the guidance, if you're sharing items, to disinfect between shifts or uses, whichever is more frequent. So basically that means you go use the printer or the copier or something, and then you need to disinfect it before the next person uses it. So think through that. Good luck with that as well. But you might need to just put, something there so people can wipe it down right afterwards. And again, if you're going to clean and disinfect, which is the requirement, are you able to actually buy those supplies? It would be really easy to put, like those Lysol or Clorox wipes there, but I've found it really difficult to even find them. So you want to make sure that you have all of this in place before you start bringing people back into the workplace. You want to make sure, that's the next point too, that there's enough soap, hand sanitizer, paper towels, anything you need to clean and disinfect. And then there's a specific EPA list of approved chemicals for using to fight COVID-19. So you want to make sure that anything that you're using is on that EPA list. And then the last thing that they recommend is just thinking through the air circulation to see if you can put in high efficiency air cleaners, air filters, things like that, and to increase the the fresh air circulation within the office. The fifth step is physical distancing guidelines. So you want to ensure physical distancing of at least 6 feet between workers and customers. You can use partitions or visual clues, like meaning like you actually mark the floor. Some examples would be, I had to go into U-Haul to rent a truck a couple of weeks ago. They actually, when you go into the office or their facility, they actually have places marked on the floor where you can stand, but they put up like a glass partition, and they also took their credit card machine and they moved it back, so it's where you're standing 6 feet away, and they just took one of their boxes, made a little table there, and then that way you're not standing right next to the person. You still had to use masks as well. So there's things like that you can do. I have a client that's moving half of the conference room chairs out of the conference room, or maybe more than half, and they're actually marking on the floor. They've measured 6 feet away. I've also seen a law firm recently that took like a plexiglass or glass sort of barrier and created a place or like a holder for it, and they just stood it up in the middle of the conference room table so people could still see each other, but there was a partition between them. Because if your table is only, maybe 4 feet wide or something, you have to also remember to sit back. You want to use telework options and modified work schedules whenever possible. So again, if you can leave people home right now, I would say just do it. Just let people continue to work from home unless it's impacting your business negatively. You can also use modified work schedules. So for example, you could have people stagger the work shifts, come in later, start people at just different times. You could also shift so you have half the people working at one point and half working at another point in terms of, flipping weeks or days or something like that. Redesigning office spaces, cubicles, and meeting rooms, like I already mentioned, and then also close or restrict common areas so people just can't congregate in high traffic areas. The whole, stand around the water cooler thing needs to go. Some other things people are doing, and this is again part of the guidance, is they want you to establish directional hallways and passageways, including like where people come into offices and leave offices, right? So they don't want people passing by each other face to face. So literally they want you to think through, okay, so if I have to go from here to this other point, like which direction am I going to walk? So you're not, crossing next to each other face to face, and you're actually all going in the same direction. If you have elevators in your building, you want to make sure that you limit the number of riders at any one time and that you require the use of face masks, because again, it's hard to stay 6 feet away. And then limit the number of people at the office at any one time. So again, you can stagger start times. You can establish alternating days. So group A works in the office this week while group B works at home, and then you flip flop. You can also return to work in phases. So again, I have a client that's bringing, like a quarter of the people back, then they're going to start adding a few more, adding a few more, adding a few more till everybody's back. And then I'm going to keep harping on this, but continue to have people work from home if it's possible. And even in the office, think about group meetings. You can still use Zoom or Google Hangouts or GoToWebinar or whatever you're going to use, or other ways to message people like Slack, or we have a client using Band, or WhatsApp. Like you can do a whole bunch of different things even if you're in the office, so people don't have to actually get into the same room and talk to one another or go to somebody's cubicle. You want to stagger breaks and meals, especially if you're going to have allow people to continue to use the break room. And you want to make sure you're complying with wage and hour regulations. So for example, remember in California, non-exempt employees have to start their meal period before the end of their 5th hour. Okay, so you don't want to have everybody, starting at 8 a.m. and then all of a sudden everybody has to get into the lunchroom between, 12 and 1, something like that. So think about staggering. Maybe you have people start at 7, 7:15, 7:30, 7:45, and you actually create a meal schedule so people know, or else of course they could leave the building and go someplace, but don't just allow everybody to sit in the lunchroom together. Require employees to avoid handshakes, similar types of greetings. Think about when guests come, whether it's a customer, a vendor, whatever, have somebody, designated to actually show them to a room so they don't just all sit in the lobby together waiting for their appointment. And then also one of the things they suggested was install what they call production transfer aids, such as, shelving or bulletin boards. So instead of me walking up and handing you documents or, whatever it is I'm going to hand you, that instead, I go place it someplace and then you can go get it from there. So again, it limits our contact. And then discontinue non-essential travel. So let's talk about vendors. Well, let me talk about the non-essential travel for 1 second. Also is, think through what's essential and what's non-essential, right? That's going to be different for every type of business. We have a new client that is a Amazon delivery service, right? That's essential travel. But think also about if you have salespeople, that are typically getting on a plane and they have to go to a client site someplace, what are the rules you're going to have for that person? Are there procedures they need to follow while they're traveling? Like most airlines now are requiring masks when you get on a plane, but what other requirements do you want to give your employees to make sure they protect themselves? And then when they return, are you going to have any sort of requirement, for example, to self-quarantine for 14 days or work from home for a period of time? So think those things through before, and put that into your policy before you start bringing people back or allowing them to travel again. Denise, one more slide and then we're going to stop and take some questions. So for third parties, also think through third parties, meaning vendors, clients, and temps, and think through like, how do you want to handle them? So are you going to require, for example, that before they can come in the building, you're going to take their temperature? If it's a worker, you're definitely going to need to do that. But what about vendors and clients, right? If it's a temp and you're getting them from an agency, then I would also suggest you reach out to the agency to see what their testing policy is. Are they testing their employees? Are they allowing you to test their employees? Like, what's the policy going to be? What are you going to do in terms of PPE? Again, if it's a temporary worker, then you're going to be responsible for providing it. If it's a vendor or a client, are you going to require them to have masks? Are you going to require them to have any other personal protective equipment when they come on site? Are you going to restrict traffic? You know, how many people can come on site at any given time? I've got some clients just have a no visitor policy right now. No one's going in to their building other than their employees. Again, the policy on no handshake greetings, just remind everybody, because it's so easy to fall back into old patterns to reach out to somebody, right, and shake their hand when you greet them. And so it's hard to sort of break that natural feeling. And then think through also, are there shared resources like pens at the front desk? I've got a client, when you go there, you've got to sign into their log, right, and get a badge. So is everybody using that same pen? Maybe the receptionist, has to just sign everybody in for the time being, or maybe you get some sort of disposable pen, or you ask the visitor to use a pen, something like that, but you want to eliminate those shared resources. When it comes to deliveries, you want to do everything you can to make it contactless pickup and delivery of products. Probably by now you've had that experience where you've gone to get a meal, for example, or you use Instacart for groceries or something like that, and they offer you that option of contactless pickup and delivery. So think about that as well. And then the best practice is to designate one location for accepting deliveries that can be cleaned frequently. So if you don't have like a warehouse, for example, it could be the front desk, it could be anything. But you just want to make sure you sort of limit that, so you don't have a lot of people going in and out, or multiple places that you have to continue to clean. Let's see. So again, use remote meetings whenever possible to limit contact from, vendors and clients. But if they have to come in, make sure you've thought through all of those different issues. And before we go on to OSHA, Denise, let's go ahead and answer any questions we have so far.
Okay, great. If you haven't added any questions, you could add them into the group chat and we'll go through them as they come in. Also, if you haven't downloaded the presentation, make sure that you go through the group chat and download the presentation. Question, can a county, so I'm assuming Orange County, get downgraded to an earlier stage if deaths, for example, go up?
Absolutely, and the governor's been clear about that. This is a gradual opening, right? So if they start to see a trend going in the opposite direction, they absolutely will shut it back down again. He said that over and over again. And he does a noon update. I don't know how to see it other than I go to Twitter to watch it. And he's like live streaming it. I'm sure it's probably on a government website somewhere as well. But you can actually watch his broadcast daily, or you can catch them on a replay later to see actually what's going on. There's also so much information out on the website, the government COVID-19 website, that's really helpful. So you can track it by the state, you can track it by the county. The other thing I didn't mention is you should also always look at your county requirements and your city requirements. Like I live in Irvine, they have a face mask requirement, right? So there's a specific requirement in Irvine that may not be someplace else. You always have to comply with the highest standard when it comes to employee stuff. Not always, but 99% of the time. So you need to comply with the highest standards. So you take a look at the state standard, the county standard, the city standard, whatever the requirements are, and comply with the most stringent of those.
Great, thank you. Do we have to, excuse me, do we have to do a worksite specific plan for our office and field?
Yes. So any place that you have employees has to be covered by that plan. And they were very specific in the guidance to say per work site. So if you have employees in an office and you also have people out in the field, you're going to have a plan for each. Now, like I've got workers outside of my house today, and not for me, but there's been workers outside all day long doing some work. If I had a business like that, I don't know, how I would do it. I think I would have to take a generic plan, right, for field workers and then update it to see if there's anything specific for this particular location where they're working today. That would be probably my recommendation, because for the most part, it's going to be determined by the type of work and then a little bit by the location probably for people that are out in the field. But yeah, you have to have it specific to every work site.
Okay. Does employee training need to be done for all employees or can we just do the training for managers? Is that enough?
No, all employees. Very specific. You have to train all employees. You're also going to want to have additional training for people that might have additional duties, like those people that are going to take temperatures, if that's what you're going to do, or that, that are going to have additional cleaning duties. So you're going to want to think through those types of training as well. But all of the things that I listed on those training pages or in the guidance, all topics have to be included and all employees trained.
Another question, do we need to screen guests? I work at a museum.
You're not required to screen guests. It's suggested, but you're not required to screen guests. So, again, if you don't want to have, somebody at the front door standing there with like a temperature gun, right, reading temperatures all day long, you could do something. You could post, the symptoms and say that no one's allowed to enter if they basically self-screen to have any of those symptoms. You could have each person fill out a piece of paper or something saying like, hey, I don't have any of these symptoms. You just have to protect individual confidentiality. So think about that as well.
Okay, next question. Do you need to do anything with an employee that travels for personal reasons? Do I need to tell them not to come in, or okay, to let them come into the office if they do not have any symptoms?
Totally your choice on this. So that's what I was saying. Think about, I said business travel, but it's a great question because it's true for personal travel as well. There's not as much personal traveling going on, but we have had that situation where, people have traveled out of state, for example, for some reason. And then I get that question a lot is, hey, do I have to have them self-quarantine? Can I have them self-quarantine? The answer is you can do whichever one you want. There's no requirement to allow people to come to work. I know that sounds sort of weird, but you don't have to have them come to work. So you could have them work from home. And if there's no work, that they can telecommute, you can also say, sorry, you can travel, but when you come back, you're not going to have any pay for the next 2 weeks, basically, because I'm going to send you home. So that's legal. It may not make your employee happy, but you can do that. And I would say you can think about that. If you want to have them come into the office, that's fine too. Obviously, if they have no symptoms, and you would just want them to monitor themselves. You could also have a shorter period of time. You could say, hey, when you come back, I'm going to have you work at home for 5 days. And if you don't have any symptoms, then you can come to the office. You could say, hey, you can come to the office, but you have to wear a mask for the next 14 days. So really, you can do any of those things, whatever is going to keep your place of employment safe.
Okay. Couple more. If employees self-check at home, is that time compensable?
I don't think so. It's because they're not subject to your control at that point. So I don't think if they're doing it at home, it's compensable. If they're standing in line at the office, it certainly is. So you can't say, stand at the door here, we get to you when we get to you, and then go clock in at work. You're gonna have to find a way to add that time in. But if they're not standing at home, they can do it that morning anytime they want to, take their temperature or self-check for symptoms or something like that. I don't think that's compensable.
Okay. And someone pointed out that the governor's updates are on KTLA Daily. Thank you for that.
Awesome, thank you.
And then what is the best link for people to look at in Orange County? You may have put it up already, but in the deck.
There is the county health department, and I don't know what the link is off of my head. I do have some links on the final slide, but I don't think there's one specific to Orange County. I always go through the state and then to the county that way. So I don't know, but if you just Google Orange County in quotes with COVID-19, I'm sure that it's out there.
Okay. The owner of our company has allowed everyone to return to work because she read that we qualify as a low-risk business because there are only 9 employees, but she has not implemented anything that is being outlined today. Is that okay? Most people have opted to continue to work remotely.
Yeah, so again, I'm telling you my interpretation of the guidelines, but speak with an attorney. My interpretation is Orange County is still limited to essential businesses. I don't know how people are coming back to work. I heard today, like I said, that there's going to be a mall in Los Angeles County opening like next week or something. I'm like, I don't know how they're doing that unless, of course, it's just for pickup or something. But from my perspective, when I read all the guidance, it says very clearly on the website that your county has to, meet the criteria, and then the business has to meet the criteria. The other thing it's not clear about on here is it doesn't say anything about essential businesses. So if you're an essential business, like I was talking to someone at Ace Hardware yesterday. Ace Hardware is an essential business because they're in the construction area, I guess. And the question I would have is there a requirement now for these businesses that have been operating this way all along to now go back and write the same plans, train their workers, all that kind of stuff? I would say there probably is. That makes the most sense, but I can't point you to something that says there's a requirement for businesses that have continued to operate to now go develop a written plan. I'm assuming that's the requirement, but it doesn't say so anyplace.
Okay. Do we need to have office employees wear a face mask if they are in an area where there is various employees sitting, but they are 6 feet apart?
So the guidance is that if you're not if you're more than 6 feet apart, it's not a problem. But you just got to remember, like if you can't physically space cubicles apart or something like that, and they're within 6 feet, then that's the best practice, is to require the face mask. If someone gets up, like if I get up from my cubicle and I go to Denise's cubicle to talk to her, we both should have a face mask on. So if you're just working in your cubicle all day or your office all day or something, you don't have to sit there with a face mask on. But if you come within 6 feet, then that's the best practice.
Okay, and then this is the last question, so you know, Linda. Um, what if we are asking employee temperature checks and an employee declines for religious or another reason? What do we do? Do we send them home? And if we do we send them home with or without pay or using sick time?
Yeah, that's a good question. Off the top of my head, I would tell that employee that this is a new requirement for coming to work at the office. I don't know of any religious exception. You obviously want to accommodate any sort of religious exceptions. I don't know off the top of my head. Maybe there's some religion that says, hey, I know there's some that don't sort of go by traditional medicine. I would say if that's the case, I would probably get an attorney involved in that case just to make sure you're doing it legally. Because again, you have to think through what's best for that employee, but also what's best for the rest of your workforce. If the other employees get wind that this one person isn't subjecting themselves to a temperature check, you're going to have problems on your hands from everybody else, because that's not going to fly that's not going to fly well with everybody else. So I would probably suggest, if it's an objection on religious grounds, that you get an attorney involved and get some specific guidance.
Okay, great. That was
Okay.
the last question. I'm going to post again for people who have just come in. I will post the presentation again. I see a couple of people asking.
Great. Thank you so much, Denise. And I'm going to go ahead and keep going, but again, we'll stop again. We'll stop again in a few minutes and we'll take some more questions, okay? All right, so we've gone through all the specific guidance the state's posted on their checklist and everything that the business has to do to reopen. I'm going to give you some other just general things that you need to think through. So OSHA and Cal OSHA, both of these come into play, obviously. OSHA at the federal level has what they call the general duty clause, and it requires employers to furnish each employee, this is the quote, employment and a place of employment which are free from recognized hazards that are causing or likely to cause death or serious physical harm. Most people have interpreted that to incorporate or, to cover COVID-19. There's an OSHA regulation 29 CFR 1904. You might want to take a look at that. It goes through different things that need to be included to keep your workplace safe. So that might also give you some good tips on how to write like a new safety policy. And I also want you to remember that California has a specific requirement that every employer have a written injury and illness prevention program. So you can right there, the link that's on this slide, that's an electronic wizard. It's an e-wizard. You can go onto the website. If you don't have one already, you can go on there and you can answer questions, and it basically, you answer some questions and then poof, here's your IIPP in writing. So it's a really handy tool. What you're going to want to do though is whatever safety policies you have in place, whatever COVID prevention plan that you're now going to have in place according to the governor's office, and whatever COVID response plan, which is the third thing, is in writing, you're going to want to just amend any current policies you have to make sure that you're incorporating COVID-19 related information, okay? So the Injury and Illness Prevention Program in California, that's a good starting point. If you already have it, have an amendment to it. or somehow reference whatever other documents, which you're going to call them, like our COVID-19 response plan, reference that as part of the IIPP, because again, you're required to have that. You're required to give it to all new hires. Okay, some other policy changes you're going to want to think through. These are just off the top of my head, things that I've come up with, right? All of your paid leave policies are going to have to be adjusted because we have new leave requirements, right? Under the FFCRA, we have the expanded FMLA, and we also have the paid sick leave, the emergency paid sick leave. So you're going to want to make sure that you're adjusting your policies accordingly. Now, there is a poster that you're required to post for the FFCRA, and that's only as of right now in effect through the end of the year. So again, you don't necessarily have to rewrite the entire policy. You can have a temporary amendment. You can say, hey, see the poster? You can do it a lot of different ways, but just remember that your paid leave policies need to be adjusted. You also are going to want to have a new request form, like for a leave of absence or for paid sick leave, that incorporates those types of options. And so think that as well. Think about your attendance policies. We don't want to encourage sick people to come to work, right? We want them to stay home. So if you have an attendance policy that counts points, for example, oh, every day off, you know, it's like a demerit or something like that, you're going to want to rethink that probably to relax it a little bit, to encourage people to stay home if they have any symptoms of anything. You're going to want to clarify your time off request procedures. So for example, if somebody's calling out sick unrelated to COVID-19, what do they do? If it's related to COVID-19, what do they do? Those should be very different things. If you send people home, like if they show up, you know, and you take their temperature and then you go, oh, sorry, it's 100.5, you have to go home. Then what is the procedure for getting them paid time off, right? So all of those things, think through about how you want your employees to notify you of different things when they happen. If you're having flexible scheduling options, you know, you want to have a policy about that. Even again, if it's temporary through the end of the year, that's fine. Travel policies we talked about. Telecommuting and IT policies. We have a telecommuting agreement that we recommend people use to be really clear about what the requirements are if they're working from home. What is the company going to pay for if they're working from home? California has a requirement to reimburse employees for necessary expenses incurred in the performance of their duties. If you're coming to the office and you're using, you know, my computer and my electricity and my internet and everything like that, that's one thing. But if I send you home and now you're using your electricity and maybe your laptop and your cell phone and, you know, your internet, I need to pay toward that, right? And there's no policy that says how to calculate that or that it's a specific amount, but you need to come up with something to contribute toward the payment of those things. And then also, again, policy on how to handle employees who test positive. That's going to be a big one as part of your response plan, not your prevention plan, but your response plan for this. Okay, workers' comp. Okay, so our world changed a little bit a week ago. Governor Newsom has now declared that COVID-19 is a workers' comp illness for any essential worker, meaning people that are working in the workplace, not those working at home. Okay, originally it was presumed that if a healthcare worker or first responder contracted COVID-19, it was work-related. Now it is what they call a rebuttable presumption that anyone that contracts it who's been working in an office or work site of some kind and tests positive got it at work. Okay, this is going to radically change the workers' comp arena for the time being. So contact your workers' comp carrier and ask at what point does it become recordable? At what point do I give the employee the notice of injury and illness? Ask them if they have any specific COVID-19 procedures and policies that you need to know about, any different forms, anything like that, because workers' comp claims are going to stay on your record for the next 3 years. So that's going to be an issue if all of a sudden you have a lot of workers' comp cases, which is another reason, I will say it again, to have people continue to work from home if possible. The other thing that's sort of interesting is, up until now, the governor has said, oh, anybody that wants a test can go get a test and your health insurance carrier is going to pay for it, right? Well, if I'm a health insurance, group health carrier, I'm going to be like, oh no, I'm sorry, you have to go get it from your workers' comp carrier. That type of conflict, I think, is going to exist now. The other thing is we have a requirement to pay expanded paid sick leave, right? If somebody gets sick. Well, if it's a workers' comp claim, does the employer still pay the 80 hours, or does the workers' comp carrier pay it? I don't know the answer to these because this is all as of May 6th, right? So again, it's a rebuttable presumption that it's a work-related illness, and so you want to talk to your carrier about how they're going to handle it. Okay, let's talk about recall procedures, meaning now we've got our policies in place, we've got our plans in place, you know, we've got the thumbs up from the county, our business is ready to go, and now we need to start thinking about who we're going to bring back to work. So here are some things you want to think about. First and foremost, you want to make sure you're bringing people back on a non-discriminatory basis. So for example, we have a brewery as a client. They could start bringing people back. They got a PPP loan. They said, great, we're going to start bringing people back. But they don't need everybody, right? Because they still can't serve food in the restaurant. They can only do takeout. So they started bringing people back in different types of positions. Well, they had to decide, how are we going to decide who to come back? And so we came up with a rating system. And in their case, I think they used attitude, job knowledge, and attendance or something. You can come up with whatever, you know, basis you want. Just be consistent across the board, because you don't want anybody to say, oh, you brought all the white people back, or all the men back, or all the people under 40 back, or any other protected category. So just make sure that even if the intention isn't discriminatory, make sure in the rearview mirror it doesn't appear that it was either, right? So come up with some rating system. We just had asked all the managers to rank all of their employees like on a scale of 1 to 10 for each of those 3 criterion, and then totaled it up, and then that gave us our force ranking, right? And we just started bringing people back to the top. You could do it in a lot of different ways. You could do it based on tenure. You could do it a lot of different ways. Just make sure you're documenting the decision making around it, right? You can phase people, you know, in terms of coming back to work. There's another thing to think about, which is the work share program. EDD has a great program, in my opinion, called WorkShare. I'm going to talk about it just for a second in case you don't know about it, because I think that this solves a lot of problems for a lot of people, actually. So the WorkShare program is a situation where, let's say you don't have, let's say I've got 10 employees right now at, you know, that normally work 40 hours a week, and I don't have enough work to have everybody come back, but I have enough work to bring everybody back at 30 hours a week. Right? Well, instead of saying, I'm going to bring, you know, some of you back at 40 hours and some of you I'm going to lay off or take, or still, you know, keep home with no work, you could bring everybody back at reduced hours. To give you a simple math explanation, again, details in the fine print, right? But to give you just a high level understanding of WorkShare, instead of having your employee go apply for unemployment directly because of reduced hours or because they're furloughed, basically WorkShare is where you go apply on their behalf, if I can use that as an example. There's an application you fill out with the state. We're hearing that it takes roughly 2 to 3 weeks to get it approved. The employees come back to work, and then there is a little bit of administrative burden on whoever does payroll to fill out a form every payroll to report to the state how many hours they worked and what their wages were, as opposed to the employee logging in to do it. But here's the difference, besides the one I already told you, which it gives everybody coming back to work at some reduced level. If an employee, like let's say I'm making $1,000 a week in wages and I apply for unemployment, I'm going to max out my benefit $450. So if you bring me back at 30 hours, I'm going to come back and I'm going to be making $750, which is more than my weekly benefit. I won't see any money from the state, okay? However, under the WorkShare program, if I came back at 30 hours, I would keep my $750 in wages, and then I would still get a proportionate amount of what would have been my weekly benefit. So in this case, I would get 25%, right? Because that was my reduction, 25% of the $450 that would have been my weekly benefit. I also would get $600 a week through the end of July, courtesy of the federal government, right? I would make more money under that program than if I just go home on my own, okay? So there's a huge difference in benefits if I just apply on myself and then I'll see if I get any benefit versus if you have me working reduced hours under the WorkShare program. So give it some thought. we have somebody on our team that's become a subject matter expert on WorkShare. So if we can help you with that application, happy to do so. Happy to help you administer it. Just give us a call and we can walk you through that. Okay, so let's talk about how to handle employees who are unwilling or unable to return to work. And those are two distinctly different categories, right? Now, here's the thing. There are going to be people that are unwilling or unable to return to work for, let's call it legitimate reasons, and also some for not legitimate reasons, right? For the reason I just said, if you collect even $1 of unemployment insurance benefit from the state of California, you're also entitled to the $600 from the feds. Okay, so we have already seen this happen as we start calling people back. They're sort of like, oh, no, thank you anyway, I'm fine, because they're making more money right now sitting at home, and they will till the end of July when that $600 goes away. So you're going to face that, and that's another reason to think about the WorkShare program, because they won't be excluded from the $600 if they get any unemployment at all. Now, you can force them to come back. You can still tell them, I mean, if they're just not willing to come back because of the money, you can also tell them, look, it's technically fraud. If they're turning down work, when they've been offered work, they turn it down, they're no longer entitled to unemployment. So you can play hardball with them, but that's something to think about, right? Because we've had situations where employees go, yeah, no, I'm good, thanks anyway. They don't realize that if the state or the feds find out that they turned down work, they're going to come after them for the money they've given them, right? So there's going to be penalties and interests involved in that as well. Now, I will also tell you, I haven't figured out how to notify EDD of those recalled to work who refuse to come back. So other than calling the fraud tip line, I don't know of any way to tell EDD like, hey, we offered this person the ability to come back and they refused, right? So there may be a way to do that, but that's something to consider, is how much hardball do you want to play with employees who say, no, I just want to stay home. You want to keep a record of the offer to return and also that the person refused. And the reason for that is a couple. One is, again, so you have documentation from an EDD perspective, right? But more importantly, if you have PPP funding, any sort of refusal to return to work will not be held against your forgiveness. But they said specifically you're going to want to have documentation that you made them an offer and that they declined the offer. So we'll talk in a second about new hire paperwork and what's required, but just think about that as well. You're going to want records of that. And then also you're going to want to create a plan for high-risk employees. And by that, again, I mean employees who are over the age of 65. People have compromised immune systems. They're going to be people, maybe you have a pregnant woman, maybe you have somebody, you know, that falls into some high-risk group. You know, you might want to have another plan for them. Can they continue to work from home? Can they work different hours so there's less contact with other employees, things like that. Now, there's also going to be people that are unable to return to work, and they fall under one of these 6 categories. And these 6 are from the FFCRA, specific to the emergency paid sick leave. Now, examine the reason, find out what it is. For some of our clients, for example, we furloughed people in March before the FFCRA went into effect. We never had to deal with this, right? Because the reason they weren't working wasn't one of these reasons. It was because we didn't have work for them. For example, like my brewery client, they can't serve food in the restaurant, so we don't have a need for restaurant workers, right? So they furloughed all of the hourly employees back in March. We never had to pay any of this or deal with it. Now, as we start calling them back, people may say, oh, I can't work because of one of these reasons. So the first one under EPSL is the employee is subject to a quarantine or stay-at-home order, right? We originally thought that the California order wouldn't be covered by this. We have since found out that it is. So if somebody's 65 years of age or older, or they have an underlying health issue, and they say, hey, I'm unable to return to work because of that, they may be eligible for the 80 hours of sick pay. They're still going to be 65 after the 80 hours run out. So I'm not sure exactly what to tell them or you about that, but they would be eligible for at least 80 hours. And then after that, presumably, if they still don't want to come back to work, you know, you don't have to pay them anymore, and they can apply for unemployment or something. Second one is if the employee is advised by a healthcare worker to self-quarantine because they might have symptoms, or if they're waiting to get tested for that, right? If somebody is caring for somebody, and this has to be, you know, presumably somebody like either they live with or a family member. It's not just like, hey, I'm going to stay home and take care of, Joe Schmo. It's like it has to be, there's some sort of relationship that would warrant this person being the caretaker. That's another reason. And then the fifth reason is that the schools are shut down. They don't have daycare, childcare, anything for the kids. And then the sixth one, we still don't have any guidance on what that means. Also keep in mind that if they fall under number 5, which is the school shut down and I can't come to work because, I can't work at work because of that, you can still have them work from home if they're working from home now. But if they haven't been working from home, you call them back and they go, I can't because I don't have childcare. They're also eligible for the Expanded Family Medical Leave Act. So keep that in mind as well. You'll need to put them on a leave of absence, and that is a paid leave of absence. I should also tell you now, at the very end, after the question slide at the very end, I put in some bonus slides that we're not going to go over today, but they're specific to the FFCRA because a lot of people didn't have to deal with that before. We did webinars on that before, but just in case, that's a good reference for you. All right, so let's talk about new hire paperwork. If the employee was furloughed, then generally new hire paperwork isn't required. Now, if you're going to change anything about their job other than their rate of pay, if you're going to change their work location, if you're going to change their job, anything that goes on the wage theft notice, which is California Labor Code Section 2810.5 form, remember to reissue that, okay? So like, again, our brewery client brought people back in different positions, right? So that wage theft notice is for non-exempt employees. It's required for all new hires. You're going to want to reissue that. If the employee was completely laid off, then the employee has to be rehired like they're a new employee. Now, some things may change. For example, the sick pay has to be reinstated, right? Because remember under I can't remember, Healthy Families, blah, 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 sick pay act that went into effect in 2015. If somebody leaves a company and then comes back, I think it's under a year, I'm not sure about the time frame, then their sick pay that they had remaining has to be reinstated, okay? You also can have them fill out a new Form I-9, but you can also just recertify their prior Form I-9. That's the Section 3 certification. Remember, though, that you need to recertify it on the new version of the I-9 form that's now in place. So if they were hired prior to February, they would have been hired on the old form. And then now you're going to want to make sure you recertify on the new form. And if you have questions about that, we can help you. And then also waiting periods on benefits may be waived, right? So a lot of times if somebody comes back under a certain period of time, then the carriers don't make them wait like, first after 60 days or something like that. They maybe don't have to wait for, 6 months or a year to get into the 401k plan. So you're going to want to make sure that you take a look at that. A couple of other things. Think about updating your benefit plans. Telemedicine now, obviously, is widely accepted. Make sure your carrier is including that in your policy and that there's coverage for that. Over-the-counter medicines are covered in the flexible spending accounts in the Section 125. So make sure that that is updated as well. Also on the 401k plan, through the CARES Act and the Secure Act, I think it is, there are a lot of changes to 401k plans in terms of hardship withdrawals and loans. They've really relaxed the requirements for getting a hardship withdrawal or taking a loan in terms of the dollar amount, the reasons, all sorts of things. So look into that with your provider and make sure your employees know that they have additional options that they can take advantage of. The other thing is if you're bringing people back or maybe you're hiring people, like just new employees, you're hiring them, there is the new Form I-9, but also the Department of Homeland Security has said, hey, we're going to relax the restrictions on personally inspecting the original documents for the time being. So they have specific guidance on how you can remotely check the documents needed to certify on page 2. There's a very specific protocol, so you're going to want to make sure you look at that. So if you are hiring somebody or rehiring somebody, but they're going to work remotely, then make sure that you take a look at how you can certify those documents. Okay, compensation. We get a lot of questions about this. Can I cut somebody's pay? I cut somebody's pay before. What do I do now? All sorts of things. here's some general rules. You can cut somebody's pay. You can go to an employee and say, hey, we're going to bring you back, but I'm only going to pay you a portion of what you were making before. It's legal. It's not going to be well received, but it's legal. If you took a pay cut before, are you going to put it back in place now that people are coming back to the office, for example? There's hazard, or some people call it hero pay. Is that going to be offered if they're coming back to work? Or is it going to be revoked if they've been getting it all along and now everyone's coming back to the office? Are you going to take it back? So think through whether the compensation that you have in place are going to be changed. Were annual pay increases missed, right? Whether you do it on a focal point basis or anniversary basis. If yes, how are you going to handle those? Are you going to catch them up? Are you going to push it off? Are you going to say, sorry, we're not doing them right now? But think through that. Also, if you have bonus plans, maybe you have a quarterly bonus plan that's tied to production and the person only worked, 1 month out of the quarter. The answer is to me sort of less important about what happens as it is that you communicate what's going to happen to the employee. I've had situations where people, managers make assumptions. Oh, well, everybody knows, of course, the bonus plan went out the window, right? But nobody ever said that, and the employee is expecting a bonus. So you want to make sure that you're communicating again and communicating again what's going to happen with people's compensation if you're going to change in any way, or if they don't have the opportunity to make a bonus or commission or whatever it is because they haven't had work, then you want to sit down and talk to them about it. Just be clear with them about what's going to happen, okay? And then just also keep in mind rules for changing compensation. For non-exempt employees, you're allowed to change their compensation forward looking, right? And I would suggest, so your payroll person's head doesn't explode, you do it at the start of a payroll period, right? Not just a random day. So if, let's say, I'm paying you $20 an hour right now, but I decide when you come back, I can't afford to do that anymore. I'm going to cut it to $18 an hour. I can't do it retroactively, but I could say, hey, beginning with the next payroll period, I'm going to reduce your pay to $18 an hour. Okay, I would put that in writing, some sort of payroll status change form so you have a record of it. And I would also tell you if it's temporary or if it's going to be for the foreseeable future. For exempt employees, the rules are slightly different, and we get a lot of these questions as well. For exempt employees, remember, you can cut their pay, but they cannot fall below the salary threshold. So right now in California, for example, if you have 25 or fewer employees, that number is 45,760. And if you have 26 or more employees, that number is 49,920. Okay, it's twice minimum wage. So you can cut pay for exempt employees as well, but you cannot make them fall below that threshold. Okay, the other thing to keep in mind with exempt employees, a lot of times people call me up and they go, oh, I'm going to cut them to 4 days a week. Can I cut their pay? Yes, you can, but remember again, you can't prorate it so it falls below that number. And if you're an exempt employee, if you work anytime during the week, I'm going to pay you your full salary. So you want to think about that as well as you make compensation changes. Okay, communicate. As I said, over communicate. Say it again, repeat it multiple times. People aren't going to hear it the first time. By maybe the third, fourth, fifth time you say it to them, they'll understand it and they'll hear it. So you want to over communicate with your employees on everything, what the plan is, what the responsibilities are, pay changes, everything like that. Also, over communicate with your clients, the vendors, the community at large. With clients and vendors that come on site, again, communicate what you're doing to protect your employees and to protect the work site. Communicate with them about what any requirements will be. Are they allowed on site? If so, under what circumstances? What PPE do they need? What are new policies if they come in? Things like that. So just what steps are being taken to reopen safely, what new policies are in effect, and then also think about how you're going to notify the third parties. I'll give you a quick example. I take my dog to doggy daycare. Couldn't do that for a couple of months, but they reopened last week. They actually put out a video because they've changed how you take the dog into the building. You put them in a different location. You have to wear a mask, all those different things. They actually filmed a video and then emailed us multiple times to say, hey, we'd love to have you back, but here's our new policy for how you bring the dog into the building. It was great. So I think those are the type of things that you need to think through. Be prepared ahead of time with communication materials in the event someone tests positive, okay? You're gonna want to have your ducks in a row ahead of time so you're not scrambling when you get that phone call from somebody saying, hey, I tested positive. You want to have a specific response plan in place for that. And then also have media communication, maybe a point of contact to deal with the media, and hopefully some training as well to respond to inquiries, especially under those circumstances. I can't imagine being Tyson Foods or any of those meat packing plants in the Midwest where they had like hundreds of people test positive. They've been in the news for so long, right? You don't want to be scrambling after the fact. You want to have a plan in place for connecting with them. Okay, Denise, I'm going to stop here and I'm going to take some more questions and then we're going to go through some different scenarios.
Okay, great. There are quite a few questions that came in. I do want to mention one thing. I've had a couple people say that the link didn't work for the Workshare program. So I did put the new link into the chat window. If you don't see it, I will put it again after we go through the questions.
And if you just Google EDD Workshare, it pops right up. It's just sometimes on slides, the link gets broken.
Yes.
When there's like a carriage return in the middle of it, you know?
Yeah, so I actually, when I looked at your link, it does look correct. It just looks like that's exactly what happened.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me get to the questions.
And carriage return, that's an old-fashioned phrase, huh, Denise?
Yeah.
Like, anyway.
Okay. How can we determine how much we need to pay for employees that I'm assuming are working from home that are using their internet to connect when signing into their computer remotely?
You can, again, the law doesn't say how to do it. It just says you have to do it. So, I mean, I can tell you some ranges. I mean, we always work from home anyway, like in my company, right? I pay my part-time people $25 a month and I pay my full-time people $50 a month. There's nothing sacred about that, right? If they have, that's really just to cover the use of their equipment and their electricity and internet. I've got a client, they're paying their full-time people $200 a month. It's like, there's no rhyme or reason to it. It's just whatever you think makes the most sense, what you can negotiate with your employees. So it just says that you have to pay a portion. Now, the other thing I'll mention is there's a difference between an accountable plan and a non-accountable plan from a tax standpoint. Back in the old days, I'll say, when cell phones were, first the rage, I'd literally have to line item my cell phone bill, and turn it in to say, oh, look, this cell phone call cost me 36 cents, right? Nobody gets that line item bill anymore. It's like, we just have unlimited everything. So I think it's easier just to say, hey, it's going to be, $10 a month toward your cell phone bill and this much toward this, and just go with that. If you don't have them turn it in on an expense report and you don't collect their bills or anything like that, technically it's a taxable amount to the employee. So that's the other thing to think about. My client that's paying $200 a month for full-time employees is going to be a taxable benefit to the employees.
Okay. On the Workshare program, what if, I'm assuming they mean employees, what if they have already applied to unemployment for the hours lost?
That's okay. EDD is all through EDD, so they sort of figure it out. I can't tell you the mechanism by which that works, but I know that it works, right? So the employees can go ahead and, I still tell everybody, hey, apply for everything as quickly as possible because it's going to take 2 or 3 weeks to get it through the system. So if they're already in the system, that's fine. Once you submit the Workshare, I think that sort of overrules the individual situation, right? So if you're going to report wages for those employees and you're going to list those employees out, EDD won't double pay them. They'll figure it out one way or the other. And if they do double pay them, then the employee should just return the money.
Okay. California EDD says that for COVID, it is not necessary for employers to apply for the Yorkshire program. The employee can just apply. That's more of a comment. I don't know
For the Workshare, for Workshare?
I think they meant Workshare program.
Yeah, no, that's not correct. The Workshare program is something that the employer applies for. And it has different benefits than an employee applying for unemployment. So yeah, the employee can go out and apply for unemployment on their own. Most employees in California have done that if their hours have been cut or they're furloughed. I'm talking about Workshare, meaning this is an application process the employer completes and sends in.
Okay. And do we know what states offer Workshare program?
I don't. I'm sure there's others in California. Again, I would just Google whatever the state name is and Workshare and see what happens.
Okay. How specifically does an employer notify EDD of those recalled to work, as you mentioned in slide 26?
And that's what I mentioned in slide 26. I don't know. I mean, I specifically said, I don't know. I looked all over EDD website. I know that if you could, in theory, use it, like, I don't think the problem is those were called to work, right? I think the problem is those you've made an offer to that don't come back to work, because you could fill out the same form, whatever it is, a DE, I don't remember the number, like 3 or something like that. There's a form that when you hire new people, your payroll company probably does it, but they notify the state, hey, I just hired Denise and she's working for me now, right? I don't think that's the problem. You could use the same form for that. I think the problem is I make an offer for Denise to come back and she's like, no, I'm fine. I'm going to sit here at home right now and collect my $600 plus my unemployment from EDD, and I'm not going to come back. How do I tell the state about that? That's what I don't know. And I can't find anything, on the state. Now, I'm going to talk about the PPP in a second, and I will tell you that's the other thing to keep in mind is on the PPP loans, you need to keep documentation of those situations where Denise is going to be a deadbeat and not come back to work, right? I make her the offer, yep, and she says no thanks. I don't want that to count against me if I have a PPP loan, so I'm going to record keep that. And then when I go to the SBA or to my bank and say, hey, don't hold this against me, obviously that's when the feds get notified that somebody did it, but I don't know what that mechanism looks like right now.
Okay. Do you know if the WorkShare program is available to churches?
I don't know, but I would have no reason to believe, unless the church is under, like, if you're self-insured for unemployment, some nonprofits go a different route. It would be different, but if your employees can collect unemployment, I don't know why it would be any different.
Okay.
I haven't looked though.
Can a California employer offer WorkShare to employees that work for another state?
If they're working in another state, I would
From other
say,
states, yeah.
yeah, I would say it's going to go, I doubt it. It's going to go based on where you're paying those wages though. So if I have an employee that works for me in California, but they live in Texas and they work in Texas, then no, because you're going to be reporting their wages in Texas. You're going to be, they would collect unemployment from Texas. So I don't think there's any way they would get it here. Not 100% positive, but I'm going to go at least 90% on that.
Okay. An employee cannot return to work because of their kids being out of school. How would that affect the approved PPP? Is that something you're going to cover in the next section?
I'm not going to talk a lot about PPP.
Okay.
I just have one slide on it. I'm assuming, again, sort of like somebody that refuses to come back because I make you an offer, I want to be a deadbeat, whatever, right? I'm going to keep saying Denise is a deadbeat. So if Denise doesn't come back, I'm going to keep documentation that I extended an offer and that she refused it, right? It should be in writing. I talked to an employer last week and I said, look, either get them to sign something just like, hey, thanks for the offer, but or have them email you something that you can hold on to say that we extended an offer and they refused, right? And just keep that in your PPP file as well as the employee file. I would say probably the same thing would be true under that scenario. Just keep a record of it and just say, hey, they weren't able to come back because they fall under this category and they're on an approved leave of absence.
Okay. What about an employee who is stating they can't come back to work because they have someone in their home that is high risk and
We're
they
going to
don't want
talk
to take
about
that
that
chance?
next. We're going
Yeah,
to go
okay.
through like 4 different scenarios next.
Okay. So let me keep going down on the list here. I have an employee came back to work. Okay, I have an employee who said they can't come back to work because they needed to watch their child. His wife was also home and he claimed she needed to watch the baby and he needed to watch the other child. That's convenient.
That's
Does he
really
still
convenient.
qualify?
I think I could argue that should not be the case, right? I mean, I think the law was pretty clear. And if you go out and look at the FFCRA, they have FAQs posted on the Department of Labor website. If you go out and look at that, it says that person is only qualified if there's no one else at home or no one else available to take care of the child. I mean, I don't know, maybe. I don't have kids, so I can't tell you is it a newborn and it requires, a village? I don't know. So
Okay. I have an employee who had a heart attack on 4/23. He's been
sorry.
out on leave, yeah, due to a doctor's recommendation. However, does he also qualify for 80 hours of EPSL for an underlying health issue?
The EPSL is specific, that's COVID. Now, if the doctor says, hey, he's not working because he had a heart attack unrelated to COVID, then no. If he says, hey, he could come back to work under normal circumstances, but I don't want him to come back to work because of COVID, because he's more at risk, then yes. So you're going to have to get some more specific details from the doctor as to why. So remember that the EPLSL is only available if the reason for the work is a reason the person is not working is one of those 6 reasons, right? So if the employee is not working because you have no work, they don't qualify. If the employee is not working because they had a heart attack and they can't work, they don't qualify. But again, if they had a heart attack and under normal circumstances, now almost a month later, they could return to work, but the doctor says, no, stay home because you're higher risk for COVID, then I would say yes.
Okay. And this is going to relate to, since I'm going in order of how the questions are coming in, this relates to the payroll question. If you lower an exempt employee to below the threshold, can you make them unexempt then?
Yes, so you can take somebody and convert them from exempt to non-exempt, and we've had quite a few situations of that. Just remember that then, you have to comply with all the wage and hour laws for that person. They need to have, they need to take their meals and breaks on time. They need to record keep. They need to get paid overtime after 8 hours in a day, 40 hours in a week. So all of those rules go into effect. Just like they were normally non-exempt. You also can't flip-flop back and forth like every other week, but if for the foreseeable future, for the next month or something like that, you want to convert them to hourly, you can.
Okay. Okay, this is a little lengthy. My brother works in a small company, all pretty much identical to the TV show The Office. Good luck with that.
Yeah.
He's in sales, sits in a cube, and everyone there except the 65-year-old receptionist has been told to come back to work 40 hours each week because it looks better for the guys in the warehouse, quote unquote, since they are essential. Since he has a wife that also works from home now, he's told she can take care of the homeschooling of the 2 children. 3 people in the warehouse have tested positive, but he's scared he'll jeopardize his future. Do you have any suggestions on that one?
Yeah, let's go through the scenarios because I'm also watching our time and I know we're coming up on 11:30. Let's go through some scenarios, and then if I don't address that, then we can take a look at that, okay?
Okay. Do you want to go through the scenarios yet? And any questions okay, so any questions that we don't answer, I just want to remind everybody, we are downloading them and we'll try to get back to you.
And I'm fine going over 11:30. I just want to respect everybody's time and get through these scenarios, and then I will stay and answer questions. I don't have another call till noon, so I will stay if I have to until noon and answer everybody's questions I can. Okay? So let's look at exposure scenario 1. So if an employee has symptoms, right? So obviously the answer to this is stay home or go home. So if they're at home and they develop symptoms, they're going to call you and they're going to say, hey, I'm not feeling well, Denise, I need, and you say, hey, Linda, stay home, right? If I'm at work and I start to have symptoms, go home. Obviously, they're going to want to seek medical advice. If the doctor says that they should be tested, then they're going to get tested. I included this link here because the governor also announced last week that they have a new testing site in partnership with somebody. I went on it. You can put in your zip code and it'll tell you where you can go locally to get tested, okay? Also, remember that if the employee does go home and their doctor says to stay home, or if the doctor says get tested, they may qualify for EPSL. The rule of thumb is they should not return to work until they have no fever without meds and no respiratory symptoms, or I'm sorry, I shouldn't say it that way. They cannot return to work until they have no fever without meds for 3 days and the respiratory symptoms have improved for 3 days. They don't have to be no respiratory symptoms, but they have to trend in that direction for 3 days, and 10 days have passed since the symptoms began. Okay, so that is now the CDC guidance. There's a link right there, but that's what they're saying is no fever and symptoms have improved for 3 days and 10 days have passed since symptoms began. Okay, so all of those have to be met. Okay, now let's take a look at another exposure. So if the worker is exposed outside of work to someone who tests positive, we've had this situation happen, and maybe this is a little bit like the scenario you were just asking about, Denise, but a lot of times I'm getting these phone calls all the time. The first and foremost, you've got to look at the definition of exposure. So the definition of exposure is either it's a household contact or having close contact within 6 feet with someone who is confirmed or suspected COVID-19. and you're taking a look at the period of time starting 48 hours before they had symptoms and going forward. Okay, that's the definition of exposure according to the CDC. So here are the types of calls I've been getting. I live with my parents. They both tested positive. Okay, I have no symptoms. Okay, if the employee is asymptomatic, the CDC says that they can come and work. You should have them wear a mask for the next 14 days. Okay, you can also choose to have them self-quarantine for 14 days. That's up to you. Okay, but we have a situation when our clients where an employee lives with his parents, both of the parents tested positive. He's had the test twice. He continues to test negative. As long as he's asymptomatic, he can come back to work, just have him wear a mask. Now, keep in mind, again, you're going to have coworkers who are freaked out by that if they know about it. So you have to think about that as well. If the employee becomes symptomatic, then go back to the last slide, have them seek medical treatment, things like that. But keep in mind the definition of exposure, because that really plays a role in this, okay? Because of scenario 3, okay? And this is, again, sort of, Denise, what you were getting at a second ago. If a worker is scared and doesn't want to come to work, right? The first thing I'm going to do is sit them down and find out if it's a legitimate concern or is it a generalized fear. If it's a really specific concern, then address it. I don't have the proper PPE. Okay, here you go. You know, something else like I'm over 65. Okay, go home, right? So if it's a specific concern, a legitimate concern, then go home. But a lot of times what we have is this generalized fear, right? You need to educate them about the definition of exposure, because that's the issue we're having a lot. So I'm getting calls like, I was with my boyfriend all weekend and my boyfriend has a coworker who tested positive. Like, I should stay home for 14 days. No, you shouldn't, because you weren't in direct contact with that person. Now, if your boyfriend starts getting symptoms or if your boyfriend tests positive and you're with him, that's a different scenario. But we're getting a lot of these like 2 or 3 step remove situations, and that is not considered a contact for the purpose of this, not considered an exposure, okay? So if it's a generalized fear, educate them about the definition of exposure, get more information about where they think they might have been exposed. Walking past somebody that you know tested positive isn't enough. It's like you have to have like genuine contact within 6 feet. Again, if they're in a high-risk category, they may have protection even under the American with Disabilities Act, depending if they have an underlying condition, and they may be eligible for EPSL. But generally, employees cannot just refuse work, right? It may jeopardize their unemployment insurance benefits as well. So you can decide as a company how hard you want to be about this. I've got clients that are like, hey, come back, or that's it. And I've got other employers that are saying, okay, we'll put you on a leave of absence for a period of time or for the foreseeable future. We're not going to pay you, but we're going to put you on a leave of absence, and then you can come back when you're ready. All right, and our final exposure one, if an employee tests positive, then obviously you're going to send or keep the employee home. You need to ask the employee to identify all people, really, employees, or it could be vendors or clients too, I guess, all employees with whom that person had close contact, remember that definition, in the past 14 days, okay? You're going to notify the employees of the possible exposure, but you cannot identify the employee tested positive. That is privacy. Personal health information is private, right? You're going to want to thoroughly clean and disinfect the work areas, advise employees to seek medical advice. You can consider having the affected employee self-quarantine, or again, if they're asymptomatic, they can continue to work and just have them wear a mask for 14 days. So let's say you have a scenario where you have a warehouse or you have an office or something, one of your employees tests positive, you're going to sit them down, you're going to say, hey, let's make a list of everybody you came in contact with within 6 feet for any period of time over the last, from 48 hours before you tested positive or had symptoms going forward, and see what they say. Then you're going to go to those employees and you're going to say, hey, and there's sample, memos out there that you can download, but hey, there's a possible exposure here. You need to self-monitor. Here's a reminder of all the symptoms. You might want to seek medical advice, and then tell them what you want them to do. Either continue to come to work for 14 days, but wear a mask, or you can work from home for the next 14 days, or whatever the case is. Okay. But that's what I was saying before. You want to have that like memo and process all ready to go just in the event that somebody tests positive. Okay. 2 more slides and then we'll take some more questions, Denise. The PPP loans. So a couple of things to know about this. The funds need to be used within the 8 weeks following distribution of the funds. Congress has a bill pending that would extend that time frame, but right now it still sits at 8 weeks. That's really a challenge if your industry isn't open, and I understand that, and so do they. Again, the government didn't really think all of this through right away. So back to my brewery client, they got a PPP loan. They're bringing employees back to the extent they can, but they're putting them in different positions because it's like, they can't, if they were a server in a restaurant, they can't have them serving right now, right? So hopefully that gets changed, but for right now, that's the way it is. So you're going to have to talk with your legal advisors or your CPA about whether you hold those funds or if you start using them in the 8 weeks per the current guidance. Maintain documentation on how the money is spent, everything you can do. You could put in a different bank account and draw payroll from there. You can just have payroll records. Some payroll companies have set up different line items to use for PPP loans. Like, everybody's doing a little bit differently. Seek guidance from your bank or whoever the loan came from so you can make sure you comply with that if you want forgiveness. Maintain, again, records of offers made if they were declined, because they will not reduce your forgiveness. The link on the bottom, I listened in last Friday to a webinar that is being done by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and Inc. magazine, which is for small businesses, right? That's the link right there. You can sign up and get on their mailing list. I have to tell you, is one of the best webinars I sat on. The editor at large for Inc. magazine interviewed a guy that's the EVP, and I want to say he's in charge of policy or something for the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. They talked, and then there was another panel. They've got recordings of the prior webinars there, but they talked a lot about PPP loans and forgiveness and documentation and all sorts of stuff. People could write in their questions as well. So I would really encourage you to sign up, go check out the town halls they've done. I think that was their 8th one or something, and get on the list for future ones. They seem to know what's going on better than anybody, because on the SBA site, there's basically no guidance right now. But he talked a lot about the bill that Congress has pending right now, and different things that he thinks is going to happen. So for whatever that's worth. And then again, here are some important links. That I've talked about most of these. The very bottom one I also found to be really helpful. It talks about different benefits from the state of California. So, there's unemployment, and there's EPSL, and there's all sorts of other things like that. There's like a little chart that they put together under what circumstances people are qualified for different things. So you should check that out as well. All right, Denise, back to questions.
Okay. Is it necessary to have employees sign a release of liability when they return to the office in case we have an outbreak at the office?
I don't think it matters one way or the other. I mean, it's not going to protect you. I mean, release of what liability? Is a workers' comp claim. Remember that whole rebuttable presumption? It's going to be a workers' comp claim. I don't know that there's any sort of civil suit or anything, but I would definitely make sure you're complying with the guidance and you have your written plan in place and you're training the employees and doing everything.
Okay. And you mentioned that discretion is part of the process. What if someone gets COVID and that you're not allowed to tell anybody else? Can we tell our management team or all the leaders of the company, or does it have to stay between just the employer and the direct supervisor or leader?
Well, it's the famous need to know basis, right? So would I put out put out an email to all management to say, hey, so and so tested positive? No, I wouldn't. Obviously, their direct manager is going to know. I mean, you're going to have to make an internal decision. I don't know how big the company is or anything like that, right? I think the point is that if it were me that tested positive, I wouldn't want you running around telling everybody about my personal situation, right? Mm-hmm. On the other hand, you have a right and an obligation to notify the employees that had potential exposure to me if I tested positive. So you're gonna have to take it from there.
Okay. Question came in that employees are continuing to get unemployment checks even after we have recalled everyone in early April. How can employees get these checks to stop? They tell me they reported that they went back to work.
Yeah, we had that situation. I don't know if it's my client that's asking that question, but we had that situation with a client last week. The employees are noticing because they're getting the bank card that gets loaded, mm-hmm. and they're looking in and they're like, oh, I'm rich. I just got paid even though I've been collecting wages. And they have to go in, every 2 weeks, I think it is, and put in the system, if they earned any wages, and they're reporting it lawfully, and they're saying, hey, I did earn wages. And I think EDD is just moving too fast, and they're not taking a look at all those claims. So I would just advise the employee, make sure that you go back in to your account at EDD, you try as best as possible to notify them, and then just don't spend the money, because they're going to come and get it when they figure it out.
Oh, yes, they will.
Yeah.
Several California attorneys have told us to treat furlough and layoff as if terminated. That is hard to pay accrued vacation with the last, so they had to pay, accrued
Yeah.
vacation with the last paycheck. So are they required to be treated as new employees when they come back?
Okay, so I say no, but here's what I'll say. I think that there's a slight tweak in, I'm going to make to your question, okay? So from a vacation payout standpoint, if somebody is going to be furloughed for more than 10 days, then they had to have all vacation paid out. That doesn't mean that they were laid off. Okay, it's a subcategory, let's call it. Okay, so there is that specific rule. It was, I think, an opinion letter from long ago that said, hey, if you're going to furlough from somebody for more than 10 days and pay out all their accrued vacation like you would if you laid them off. But for other purposes, I don't think you have to consider them laid off. You can if you want to, but we were drawing a distinction between furlough, which we think is like a temporary leave of absence, and laid off, which is like, bye-bye, we don't know if we'll ever bring you back, right? So I personally, we have been advising our clients to treat them differently, but we also have told our clients that if you're gonna furlough them for more than 10 days, you need to pay out their vacation.
Okay. If an employee was working part-time, 35 hours a week, but their employee hours were now reduced to 28 hours a week, how come the employee was denied for partial unemployment?
I don't know, obviously, because I don't know the circumstances, but if they make more than what their weekly benefit would be, then there's no money to be received, right? So if my max benefit is $450 a week, let's just say, right? And I make $500 this week, state's not going to pay me anything. It's more than my weekly benefit. But that's why I was saying go to the work-share program, because I would receive benefit if we're under the work-share program, as opposed to me just applying for unemployment on my own.
Okay. I think this is more of a comment regarding work share in other states. If your other state employee is working under a corporation that is registered under a tax ID in another state, you will need to apply for a separate work share program in that state. Some of the work shares in other states require that you have at least 2 employees employed. So that's a comment for someone.
Okay, great.
But good to know. Thanks. We appreciate that information. What about an employee? So I was talking about the at-risk people. What if you have an employee who has an at-risk person at home? I think you probably answered the question, but you might want to just run that one by again.
Yeah, so if, that's one of those situations that's sort of in between, right? So we have had that situation where somebody lives with like a grandparent and they are worried about exposing the grandparent. Again, you're gonna have to decide internally how much hardball you want to play with this person. Legally, there's nothing you can do. I mean, legally, there's nothing that employee can do. They can't point to anything to say like, I should stay home because I live with a grandparent, right? They're not at risk themselves, so they're not covered by any of those things. This is where I would say be flexible and be human about it, right? If that person doesn't want to return to work and they're a valuable employee and you want to allow them to have like a temporary leave of absence or something, then let them do that, right? I don't know if they'd be eligible for unemployment. That's between them and the state of California. I would say be human about it if they're concerned, but also, again, educate them about risk, educate them about the safety precautions they can take, let them know everything you're doing to make the workplace as safe as possible, right? Tell them they can continue to wear a mask. Maybe you alter their schedule or their position or their job duties in such a way to eliminate as much contact with other people as possible. And again, you can tell them, no, you got to come back to work, or you can, put them on a leave of absence or anything in between.
Okay. Do you know if there's resources to help pay for all the protective, I'm assuming PPE and extra cleaning?
I do not know. I know there's a lot of resources on the state website. So again, you can go to the covid19.ca.gov and see if there's anything there. I don't know if there's any like financial resources or not for that.
We have a suggestion for another webinar.
Great.
Do you think you will Will there be another webinar to help create site-specific protection plan?
Um, you know, I'm open to doing anything that helps support everybody. So if there's a specific thing, you can. I went through all of the guidelines and they're going to be so specific to an employer. So, you know, whoever suggested that, why don't you reach out to me? I'm happy to talk to you and see if there's a way we can do that as a webinar.
Okay, great. We have an employee that is baby bonding with her FMLA leave, and it's concluded as of last week. The employee would like to use a couple weeks of EPSL before returning to work. Do you know if she'll qualify?
For baby bonding,
So the FMLA leave.
the only way that she would qualify for EPSL is under number 5. Like if she doesn't have childcare, then I guess she could have 80 hours. If she couldn't work because there's no childcare, no one to take care of the baby, then she would qualify in EPSL. If she's already exhausted her FMLA, her 12 weeks under regular FMLA and CFRA,
That's what it looks like.
yeah, if she's already exhausted all that leave, she wouldn't qualify for any additional leave because the expanded FMLA takes into consideration all of the other FMLA and CFRA leaves, or actually all the other FMLA leave. So if she exhausted those 12 weeks, she doesn't get any more, but she could, in theory, qualify for the 80 hours. Again, I ask, okay, what are you going to do about that baby 2 weeks from now? But that's a different situation.
Right. Let's see. How many symptoms are needed to officially send someone home? That's a good question. For example,
Great
someone
question.
is known to have, yeah, I mean, seriously, someone is known to have asthma and she has shortness of breath and they think it's her asthma or she thinks it's her asthma, but we want to be sure how we should handle it. That's a really good question.
Yeah, I would look on the CDC website to see if somebody's answered that question because I don't know. I have allergies. So for me, a cough, you know, is not unusual, right? Like every morning. So yeah, I don't know that I've seen any guidance that says, oh, if they have 2 or more of the following, right? Because there are people that have tested positive that never get a fever. There are people that test positive that don't have shortness of breath. There, you know, it's all over the map. I have a CEO of a client that was in New York City back early March, right before everything started, came home and she lost her sense of taste and smell. So that is now listed on symptoms, but it wasn't when she first got it, right? So it's all over the map. I don't know if there's any rule. Again, you could have your own internal rule that says, hey, if you have any one of these symptoms, then go home. Or you could look to see if maybe you need to have some other guidance.
Okay. Just another question again. So if you didn't download the presentation, if you didn't, you can look at the slides right there. There's a link to the presentation. 2 more questions, Linda. In regards to EDD paying UI for those working, it stated not to certify until May 9th and then not until May 18th. How do we certify so this does not happen? That doesn't make much sense to me,
I don't
but
understand.
I'm not the expert on that. So maybe the
But I don't
person who typed
understand
that question.
I don't even understand what you said. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not getting it either. So maybe the person who typed that question in can either reach out to us directly with your specific situation. Can you require employees to use PTO for days on furlough if the schedule is reduced?
So yes and no. We've had this happen a lot. So I will give you a couple of different answers. So one is that state of California, if you combine sick and vacation time into PTO, it makes it a little bit more difficult. So with vacation time, yes, generally you can pretty much do whatever you want to do because there's no requirement in California to offer it. If you do offer it, there's some rules around it. I know of an opinion letter from a long ago that suggests that, hey, in order to force someone to use vacation, you should give them like 90 days notice if it's going to be like a shutdown week. I think that you could probably just make it like a voluntary thing, but we have had clients that have said, no, I'm going to force them to start using their PTO. Again, this is where workshare would be awesome. You cannot force people to use their 3 days of sick days, 3 days of sick pay, or 24 hours of sick pay. So that's where it gets complicated. If they've already exhausted their 3 days, then you know that the rest of it could be construed as vacation. And then you have to decide whether or not you want to force that issue or not. But I would make sure that you're not forcing them to use their sick pay for the furlough unless they're sick. And actually then it's still an employee choice to use. Okay. I know that was sort of a rambling answer, but yeah.
There's no easy answers on so many of these
This one,
questions.
yeah,
So,
that one's a tough one because again, you know, I've had that situation come up where somebody wants to say, hey, Denise, you know, we're going to shut down between Christmas and New Year's and we want you to use a week of vacation time or PTO or something like that. And we've said to them, okay, you should give them that guidance, you know, before September 25th, basically, or, you know, 3 months before. Under these circumstances, I don't know. I think personally, I would roll the dice if that's what I want to do. But I don't know that there's a downside to giving the employee the option. The bigger issue is when you try to do that with exempt employees. That's the bigger issue. So I don't know.
okay.
I would say maybe that's a good time to get your employment counsel involved.
Okay, great. And that was the last question. I did ask for that question to be clarified, but I haven't heard
Awesome.
back yet.
Okay.
So
Okay,
that would be
great.
it.
Well, people can reach out. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. I know this was long. It is 11:47, so it's even longer than I expected, but hopefully you found some value in this. And again, if we can do anything to support you on applying for Workshare or writing these policies for you or something, please reach out. And Denise, thank you so much for, as always, being our moderator. Really
Welcome.
appreciate it. We will, you know, we've been recording this. Hopefully that works. And we'll get this posted as well out on our YouTube channel.
Yeah, I'll get it posted on, once we have it available, I'll post it on our YouTube channel. And also you can visit the Ethos website, and under that, it will link to webinars. It will show all our past webinars that have been done and any upcoming webinars. So you could always go back and check there also.
Great. All right, everybody. Thanks so much. Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.